Good morning. Good morning, everyone. As my mother used to tell my high school friends, you ain't got to go home, but you got to get out of here if you're not here for a commerce meeting. And with that, we're going to call this meeting of the Full Commerce Committee. We're going to call it in session. It's time to get commercial. Mr. Clerk, would you please call our roll?
Representatives Alexander, Boyd, here. Calfee, present. Camper, Faison, Haston, here. Hazelwood, here. Hodges, here. Holtzclaw, Johnson, here. Lynn, here. Manis, here. Moon, here. Powell, present. Powers, here. Sparks, Thompson, here. Towns, Vital, present. Zachary, here. Vice Chairman Bricken, here. Chairman Vaughn,
here.
Chairman, you have a quorum.
That's great. Before we get started, anybody have any personal orders other than me? I want to say happy birthday to the best analyst in this building, Mr. Ben Voitis. And seeing none others, we're going to get into our calendar today just to give everybody kind of a order of business that we're going to do. We're going to work through some pretty quick bills here. Then we're going to go out of session in order to hear some testimony and hopefully, maybe not, wind up our, well, today it's not extra credit. Today it's just full course credit. So those who are not here may see an impact to their Yelp rating by the time we get through with this session. So with that, we'll get into our calendar. First bill is House Bill 0170, and without objection, we're going to roll that item 1 week. Next item is HB 1652. Without any problems, we're also going to roll that one 1 week. But we're not rolling House Bill 1668 by Chairman Moon. We're going to hear that one right now. Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members. House Bill 1668 is really a bill to clean up and clarify something for the mortgage lenders. Right now, a mortgage originator or lender has to put two numbers on the document. And one of them is a Tennessee license number, and the other one is a NMLS number. And the adjacent states to Tennessee do not require it. I believe only Tennessee requires two numbers. So the short is we were just going to make things more simple for our mortgage lenders. Mr. Chairman?
That sounds like a fantastic bill, Representative Moon. But I see Chairman Powers' hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Moon, could you tell us what NMLS stands for, please?
Nationwide Multi-State Licensing System. And we worked with the department, and they helped tweak the language, and that's why it says a unique identifier.
I just wanted to see if you remembered. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. Any other questions for our bill sponsor? Representative Lynn.
So which number will it be? The state license or the MLS?
It will be number? Like the other adjacent states, the NMLS number.
Seeing no other questions on this bill, I'm going to call the questions. All those in favor of House Bill 1668, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none. 1668 is on to calendar and rules.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members.
House Bill 1727 is being rolled to the heel of today's calendar. And so that brings us to House Bill 204 by Leader Camper. Leader Camper, you're recognized at your microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee members. appreciate the opportunity, Mr. Chairman, to present the Crown Act again, just bringing it to current posture. You know, we had it last year, and there were people that had some concerns about creating a protected class, and that's not what we were trying to do. We were just trying to make sure that people whose hair and their natural styles, people are not discriminated because of it. And so you've worked very hard with me. The Department of Safety has worked hard with me. Mr. Brown from NFIB to try to get the bill in a good posture. So I'd move. We saw got a motion and a second already? Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And so, Mr. Chairman, I know you and I talked about an amendment you wanted to offer, and so I'll defer to you, Mr. Chairman, on the amendment.
All right, thank you. And I'm gonna pass the gavel over to Vice Chairman Bricken to handle this portion of today's ceremony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure when I'm supposed to hit this sometimes, but I think you have an amendment to this bill?
Yes, sir. It's drafting code 12880. And for folks that that are curious as to why we're amending this, is number one, is I support the leader's efforts on this bill. I was going to joke about how I'd been discriminated against by my hair, but I don't have enough. So, but no, I grew up in a diverse community. I understood at an early age that hair means different things to different folks with regards to its importance to them, not only in their raising, but also their culture and other things. And so when this bill came through, I tended to be sympathetic to it. Yet when I read it, it was creating another protected class. And I struggled with that because hair is something, your appearance is something that can be changed. So this would have provided a protected class that someone could have gone into and come out of by virtue of how they felt about wearing their hair for a certain period of time. So it's like, okay, how do we make this? How do we protect the protected classes that we have? Because most folks in the protected class system we've got now, they're either born that way or they've had an unfortunate incident occur to them, but you can't change that. And so with that being said, I worked with Leader, and she was very helpful, and I worked with Jamie on our legal staff to come up with a way that we could provide protection against discrimination for hairstyles and hair choices, but yet not go all the way over into a protected class. And what this does, this bill sets up some rulemaking by the Department of Labor and Workforce Development, and they will promulgate rules with some penalty structure and some discipline structure if somebody wants to file a complaint about hair discrimination, which like I said, I fully support, but I did want to try to get this to a posture that I could really like the bill, and this is what does it for me. And so I'll be happy to take any questions on the amendment if anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All right, we have Amendment 12880. It's been properly motioned and second. Do we have any questions on the amendment? Seeing none, let's call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Amendments on the bill. I didn't hit it hard enough, did I?
And this bill will, as amended, will go to GovOps for the rule promulgation portion of it, and we'll get it in posture before it goes onto the House floor. But again, I have a great amount of respect and admiration for the bill sponsor, and I'm tickled that we could get something done on this, on a piece of legislation that she's passionate about. So are there any other questions on the bill as amended? Question on the bill. All those in favor of Bill 204, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. We're headed to GovOps.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members. I appreciate everybody working with me on this bill.
All right, and now we are going to go out of session to hear from the Tennessee Valley Authority. They have graciously accepted our invitation to come and talk to us about their overview and regulatory role in managing our wholesale power distribution throughout the state. And so we're going to go out of order here and listen to that testimony. Then hopefully we'll have some time for some questions, and then we will also hear from the Tennessee Public Utilities Commission afterwards. So with that, we're going out of order, and would our guests from TVA join us at the microphone, and please introduce yourself for the record. And again, members, if we could, we'll hold our questions until the end of their presentation.
Sir. Good morning. All right. Good morning, Chairman Vaughn and members of the committee. Thank you very much for having us here today. My name is Melanie Farrell. I'm the Vice President of External Strategy and Regulatory Oversight for TVA, and I'm here with Cameron Heck, who is the Director of Regulatory Assurance. So I'm looking forward to speaking with you today about how we serve this role of regulator to our 153 municipal and cooperative local power companies that serve across a 7-state region. And as a regulatory role that is critical to the success of the Valley's public power model and helps protect the interest of nearly 10 million electric ratepayers. Go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to start today's discussion by providing a brief overview for the committee of TVA's larger mission of service, which is grounded in energy, environment, and economic development. And then I'll pass it to Cameron, who will discuss TVA's public power model, what it is, and how we implement it with 153 local power companies which supply the electricity. And then Cameron will review TVA's regulatory authority, providing some historical context, review of the basis and scope of TVA's regulatory authority, and discuss some of our regulatory policies and processes, and then conclude with highlighting the roles and functions that our team provides to help give you a sense of the depth and scope of our role. So let me begin here with this, which is simply a map to geographically orient you all to TVA's service territory. We serve virtually all of Tennessee, but also portions of Kentucky, Virginia, North Carolina, Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi, so a 7-state region. Our mission, as defined by the TVA Act of 1933, is to serve the people of the Valley to make life better. And I will share a personal alignment and passion I have here as a person that grew up in small-town Tennessee with a father who is a 40-plus year entrepreneur of a small business. It is, I take great pride in working for TVA and working every day to support and serve this mission. This mission has been around for almost 90 years, and while there are differences today and there are different challenges than in 1933, this mission is no less critical today than it was then in terms of impacting the lives that we support in the Valley. Next slide. So I want to spend a little bit more time talking about how we deliver on our mission, because I think it's very important to ground in. So first, energy that is low cost and reliable. To meet the needs of the Valley, TVA generates power from a diverse portfolio of assets, including nuclear, hydro, renewable energy such as solar and fossil fuels. The power is delivered to our customers, the 153 local power companies who serve more than 10 million people and some 700,000 businesses and industries across our service territory. We also sell directly to 57 large industries and federal installations such as Kimberly-Clark, Bridgestone Tire, Nucor Steel, Olin Chemical, Redstone Arsenal, and the Department of Energy's Oak Ridge operations. We transmit this energy over 16,000 miles of transmission lines. TVA's transmission system is one of the nation's largest and most reliable, delivering power with 99.999% reliability every year since 2000. In addition, TVA's mission focuses on environmental stewardship. As a faithful steward of the Valley's rich natural resources, we are committed to clean air and a clean water supply for our region, as well as protecting its historical, cultural, and environmental resources. Through the system of dams in the Tennessee Valley, TVA was originally charged with managing the Tennessee River system for the purpose of power production, navigation, and flood control. Today, we continue this work while also ensuring the river system provides additional benefits, including water supply, water quality, and recreation. And finally, the third pillar of our mission is in economic development in our region. Through our partnerships with local and state economic development organizations, we attract companies from across the globe and support job growth and job retention in our communities. Over the past 5 years, TVA has worked with our partners to deliver $45.9 billion of investment and approximately 350,000 jobs for the region. I'll now take that a step and highlight further some of the impacts directly to the state of Tennessee. So we manage 7,000 acres of shoreline on Tennessee's lakes and waterways and 170,000 acres of public land. This supports TVA's economy as well as provides countless recreation and environmental benefits to the people of the state. In terms of direct economic development benefits, TVA, in partnership with our state and local colleagues, in fiscal year 21 attracted $6.5 billion of investment in the state and created jobs, created or retained roughly 55,000 jobs. Those results do not include the major announcement of last September where Ford Motor Company and SK Innovation announced plans to locate their new electric vehicle and battery plant in West Tennessee. Plans for the company's largest, most advanced, and efficient auto production facility will create nearly 6,000 jobs and invest $5.6 billion in the local economy. The project represents the largest investment in TVA's economic development history and established our region as a leader for EV and battery manufacturing. Lastly, in FY21, TVA made almost $340 million in lieu of tax payments to the state, which positions us as one of the largest taxpayers in the state of Tennessee. So with that, I'm going to pass, I do have one more slide. One more to cover before I pass it to Cameron. So last but not least, I wanted to highlight our rate competitiveness with this slide. So we have worked to sustain lower operating and maintenance costs over the last decade, which has positioned our rates to be amongst the lowest when compared to the top 100 utilities across the United States. The chart on the left-hand side shows a comparison of average retail rate, and the chart on the right shows the average industrial rate. TVA is in the lowest quartile in both, with our industrial rates being some of the lowest in the nation. We know our ability to keep rates low and reliability high while also ensuring we are good stewards of the environment is key to the livelihood of the 10 million residents that we serve in this region, and also key in attracting the businesses and industries that come. We're very proud of this. So with that, I will pass it to Cameron, who will dive now specifically into our regulatory framework.
Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. We'll now transition our conversation to TVA's role as regulator. First, before we do that, to kind of help set the stage for that conversation, I want to provide a little bit of background on where and how did this regulatory role begin, this model begin. From a historical perspective, David Lilienthal, known as the father of public power, was one of TVA's first 3 directors and eventual chairman. He felt strongly that only a public power model could accomplish the objective of providing affordable electricity for everyone. Mr. Lilienthal recognized that distributors of TVA power had the responsibility for the ratepayer and community relationship subject to broad TVA regulatory policies. David Lilienthal envisioned a balanced regulatory approach, which is consistent with TVA's regulatory framework today. He helped build the TVA public power system according to one guiding principle, affordable power for everyone in the Tennessee Valley. To achieve that goal, he felt that public power should be distributed publicly through a network of municipal boards and rural co-ops. So this slide is intended to highlight some of the key attributes of the public power model. TVA partners with 105 municipal or local governments and 49 member-owned cooperatives to improve the quality of life for the people of the TVA Valley, or the Tennessee Valley. But how do we do that? Being nonprofit, unlike investor-owned utilities, TVA and local power companies are nonprofit. We don't have investors for which we are trying to provide a financial return on that investment. TVA sells electricity we generate at wholesale rates to local power companies, who in turn distribute that power to end-use consumers at retail rates. We collectively are focused on providing safe, affordable, reliable, and increasingly clean energy to all end-use consumers. TVA was created to provide power to the people. The TVA Act intended that TVA be a public power company from the beginning. The TVA Act specifically states that the TVA board was empowered and authorized to sell the surplus power not used in its operations to states, counties, municipalities, corporations, partnerships, or individuals, and shall give preference to states, counties, municipalities, and cooperative organizations of citizens or farmers not organized or doing business for profit, but primarily for the purpose of supplying electricity to its own citizens or members. When it comes to governance, TVA local power companies have local governance subject to TVA's regulation as outlined in the TVA Act, Wholesale Power Contract, and the TVA Board directives, and we'll transition to what that looks like next. Next slide. So it's important to note that TVA serves as both a regulator and regulated entity. The role that I'll discuss today, however, is limited to TVA's role as regulator and its oversight function of the 153 local power companies that distribute TVA power. I would preface the slide we have here with saying that from here on out in the presentation, you'll notice that at its core, the philosophy and execution of TVA's regulatory role is centered on the protection of the ratepayer. That is our focus with local power companies in achieving the regulatory objectives of the TVA Act. So who do we regulate? We regulate the LPCs within our service territory. Why do we regulate them? We regulate local power companies to achieve the regulatory objectives of the TVA Act. Specifically, Section 10 of the TVA Act grants the TVA Board authority to regulate local power companies. It provides that TVA can enter into contracts, approve rate schedules, and enter into rules and regulations in its judgment that are necessary or desirable to carry out the purposes of the TVA Act. So what do we regulate? The two primary areas the TVA regulates are non-discrimination and low rates. We will get into more of that in a little bit and how we do that in some following slides. But in summary, local power companies are required to treat ratepayers within the same rate class in a non-discriminatory manner. No special treatment or concessions to individual ratepayers within a rate class. They must be treated fairly and consistently. We will also discuss the variety of ways in which TVA's regulatory function impacts and regulates local power company retail rates. Next slide. So this slide is intended to demonstrate the source of TVA's regulatory authority and from where it is derived. It is important to note that TVA's regulatory authority originates from the U.S. Constitution and the TVA Act. The Constitution gives Congress the power to dispose of property belonging to the United States government, and case law has shown that TVA power is considered property of the United States government. Congress recognized that the board might need the TVA board, which is appointed by the president, I would mention, and confirmed by the Senate. But the Congress recognized that the TVA board might need to establish certain policies and requirements to carry out its mission of providing for the social and economic welfare of the residents of the Tennessee Valley. So to do this, Congress delegated its oversight powers related to the sale of TVA power in the TVA Act to the TVA board. To achieve these objectives that I mentioned of non-discrimination and low rates, the TVA Act grants the board authority to enter into power contracts with local power companies, and also, in addition to including regulation in the form of power contract terms, the TVA board may provide for rules and regulations in its judgment may be necessary to carry out the purposes of the TVA Act. So this slide is just a basic summary, excuse me, of TVA's regulatory authority, where it's derived from both in the TVA Act, which grants the TVA board the broad authority I mentioned, and so this just encapsulates our regulatory role when you distill down the previous slide that I walked through on our authority. So this slide, the next slide here is intended to highlight some of the regulatory activities that TVA carries out to achieve those regulatory objectives of low rates and non-discrimination. So when it comes to rates, TVA has the authority to set wholesale power rates and, broadly speaking, review and approve retail rates to ensure low rates. And we'll get into that, what that looks like a little bit more later. Non-discrimination, I mentioned that. What does that mean? Well, I briefly touched on it. The TVA works with local power companies to help ensure that there is non-discrimination within the customer rate classes by reviewing rate schedules and service practice standards and rules and regulations as carried out consistently and fairly. And use of revenues, a primary contract term that we have with local power companies that we outline very specifically what local power companies are allowed to use electric system revenues for. Just some examples are like operations and maintenance expenses, electric system capital improvements, systems indebtedness, things like that that are tied to electric system operations. One distinction I'll mention when it comes to the municipal contracts under use of revenues, specifically that the only source of revenue from which a municipality can derive from a municipal local power company would be the payment in lieu of taxes that they get on an annual basis, and that formula is set by the state. And then also federal standards. The TVA board adopted some standards under the Public Utilities Regulatory Policies Act, or PURPA, regarding service practice policies. These speak to things such as deposits, termination of service for non-payment, billing, and information to consumers. We provide some standards there that we adopted, as well as some other standards related to interconnection and other things. As well as net metering is another area that we adopted. Under financial health, TVA monitors the financial health of local power companies through the receipt of monthly and annual financial reporting. And we also review their external audit reports, and in many cases reconcile those with their annual financial reporting to help ascertain whether the local power company's external auditor may have identified any accounting issues or unauthorized loans from one division or other internal control issues. And then also joint use. Our contract allows for local power companies to share for their divisions, if they have multiple divisions, to share certain resources and assets. But we have a requirement that they allocate the costs appropriately, who's using those assets, in order to make sure that electric system ratepayers are not subsidizing non-electric operations. And that all helps to keep rates low. We can move to the next slide. So this slide here is intended to highlight some of our more recent regulatory policies and processes and how they support our regulatory objectives of low rates and non-discrimination. So you'll see all these items we have listed here feed up and support low rates and non-discrimination in some way, shape, or form. The rate review process, I'll just talk about a handful of these, but our board approved a rate review process back in 2013 that prescribes certain metrics that we have to look at in order to authorize or not a local rate adjustment request. We also have use of revenues guidance that further clarified appropriate uses of electric system revenues by issuing clarifying guidelines. Specifically, we made allowances for investments in charitable contributions and economic development. And also, we have a complaint resolution process. We refined TVA's process to promote ratepayer confidence and increase transparency to local power companies, ratepayers, and other regulatory entities, which allows them to reach out to TVA to help address complaints at local power companies. And we can talk a little bit more about that later as well. Pole attachment rate regulation. TVA provided more definition and clarity around its regulation in 2016 around pole attachments. The full cost recovery methodology we have allocates the cost of pole ownership to each of the parties occupying space on the pole, and is critical to helping us achieve low rates. And then we also offered and developed some guidance on how we evaluate mergers, acquisitions, and consolidations, as well as provide additional guidance on broadband and electric vehicles. And so This slide here is intended to highlight the different activities carried out by each of the different functions within regulatory assurance to help achieve low rates and non-discrimination. So as you'll see here, we have activities like monitoring local power company financial health. I mentioned earlier that we do receive financial reporting from our local power companies, so we're able to evaluate their health in order to ensure that they remain viable as an entity and support them in ways that we can. And also, we do perform pro forma financial analysis of LPC's financial health when it comes to requests to invest in certain things like broadband before we will agree and allow them to invest in broadband. We also perform analysis of LPC uses of revenue. That's primarily carried out as part of our role in our compliance function, which we'll transition to now. But that's the intention there is to ensure that local power companies are using electric system revenues for electric system purposes. As we move from left to right on the regulatory assurance and compliance function, I already talked about the annual compliance reviews, and we also provide professional and technical accounting advice to our local power companies, talking to them about the latest accounting policies that might have been prescribed through FERC and others. We also help them in how they're supposed to book accountings and other things related to FERC requirements, and as well as carry out a variety of different compliance work products that help us determine that local power companies are operating in a way that's consistent with their wholesale power contract requirements. And then lastly here we have our regulatory policy and research group, which is primarily focused on developing and interpreting regulatory policy. So we're on the front end looking out and doing research to understand what the future might look like as it relates to future technologies and how that might impact TVA and local power companies, things like battery storage and what does that look like in the future, other distributed energy resource topics, things such as that. They also provide support to our regulatory assurance and compliance analysts who are situated throughout the TVA service territory and working with our local power companies on interpreting the wholesale power contract requirements and clarifying wholesale power contract questions. And lastly, we have, as I mentioned earlier, a complaint resolution program. We adopted that in 2017. It's posted on TVA's website. Local power companies as well as ratepayers can have many ways of reaching out to TVA for assistance on resolving complaints, because they can either submit a web form, an email, they can call a hotline that we have, and we work productively and constructively with our local power companies to resolve these complaints that come in. Next slide. So this slide here is a visual of our regulatory assurance team's presence across the valley, just to give you a sense of where we're situated. As you can see, we're spread out across the valley and close to many of our local power companies, which allows us to work very closely with them and the communities they serve. Our team works hard every day with local power companies across the valley to protect ratepayers. We provide regulatory policy guidance, conduct compliance testing, review local power company financial information, and provide accounting support, among other activities, as I've discussed. And finally, we'll conclude our presentation today with sharing the mission statement of TVA's Regulatory Assurance Group to serve the people of the Valley through objective, consistent, and transparent regulatory oversight. And much like the personal example that Melanie shared earlier, I'm very proud in the work that we do in our regulatory function as we are working with our local power companies every day to ensure the ratepayers are protected, that we work hard to achieve low rates and non-discrimination. It's a very rewarding group to be working with and supporting. But we'd like to just thank you all very much for the opportunity to provide a high-level overview of our role as regulator. It's critical to helping us help TVA ensure that rates are low and ratepayers are treated fairly and consistently. We would be happy to take questions at this time.
Thank you very much. And for our members, make sure Mr. Mr. Ben gets your hand up. I got one down here. Yeah. But I've got a few questions of my own for you, if you don't mind, as we as try to get my mind around this whole concept. I've personally been struggling with it as we've gone through this, as your role as regulator, but also wholesale supplier. So you are actually regulating your customers, and it seems as there could be an inherent conflict between how hard do you come down on the people who provide you revenue. I know you're a federal entity and that type of stuff gets in there, but it seems like maybe that's not the most transparent, conducive way for a regulator to function when the regulator is being paid by the person that he's regulating. But I guess our forefathers thought that was a great thing to do in the past. With regards to your wholesale power contracts, I understand that's one of the vehicles you just attested to that you used for managing compliance. But yesterday, I thought it was interesting. We've talked about the fact that your largest customer is thinking about leaving you. And as they think about leaving you, are y'all still going to regulate them after you are no longer contractually bound? Because if you don't have authority to do that, then you're really not much of a regulator. You're kind of a customer service manager, because you can't regulate. A regulator regulates everybody in the valley. So I want to figure out what that relationship would look like for not only the people within that utility's purview, but also what losing 10% of your revenue or more across the valley would make it look like to my colleagues, co-ops and munis that are, I guess they're LPCs as y'all refer to them, what that would look like. And I know that's a lot to digest. It's kind of a rambling form of stream of consciousness as opposed to a question, but I think y'all remember my question back there at the first.
Sure. Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. Assuming and presuming that a local power company provides notice to us consistent with our power contract requirements, we would regulate them up until the point of which that contract no longer is in place. After that, it would, and I'm not an expert at Tennessee state law, but it would then likely fall subject to whatever the Tennessee state law requirements apply. But they would not be regulated by TVA any longer.
Well, I guess that's my point. I'm not so sure we've got any Tennessee state law that would guide that practice, considering the fact that we've always deferred to TVA. What a quandary that would present.
I was going to offer, and Cameron can help me with this, but as you saw in our region, our regulatory authority.
Could you turn your microphone on?
Sorry, I turned it off instead of turn it on. So let me start again. As you saw in our map, in terms of our service territory, where we do serve the majority of Tennessee, we in 6 other states around us serve customers where you have a state not fully served. So those outside of that are not our customers are governed or oversight is provided by other entities, whether it be a public service commission or utilities commission. It just happens that Tennessee, we serve power to the majority of those LPCs. But Cameron is right, but our authority to regulate is not driven by geographic location. It's focused on our power customers.
Again, that's an interesting hypothetical. With regard, and I'm going to ask 2 more questions, and then we'll go around the horn, and then I've just got so many questions. One has to do with the issue of broadband expansion. Well, no, let's go back. I want to go to non-discrimination. Non-discrimination first. Does your power contract, I know that it sets out that rates cannot be charged differently across, I guess, an LPC's territory. What about practices for system expansion costs? Do y'all regulate that as far as whenever, say, a new industrial park or a new residential subdivision gets constructed and the LPC decides that they need to extend power in there and they have a policy that charges the developer or the industry for the extension of those services. Is that spelled out specifically in your wholesale power contract, or is that left to the local policies and procedures of the LPC? Because I want to know how a customer on one side of town knows that his system expansion costs are relayed the same as the customer on the other side of town.
Thank you for the question. So TVAs are under our regulatory oversight. We work with the local power companies to help set rates. But in terms of expansion, we allow for local power companies to spread the cost of that expansion. They have to collect it, but they spread the cost of that expansion into their rate base. And that's intended to help keep rates stable and low across the system itself. We're looking at it from a system-wide view. There are some specific costs, and these are more properly answered probably by our rate design administration group as it relates to some aid to construction and other costs that which the local power companies recover in those efforts. But broadly speaking, we allow for local power companies to spread those costs across the rate base in order to make sure that rates overall are kept low and are able to do that.
So it sounds to me like, if I could discern in there, and please clarify if I
Sure.
get it wrong. It sounds like that's maybe something that y'all don't look as heavily into from a regulatory standpoint of putting forth the methodology for capital expansions of their system. Again, how does one person know that they're being treated the same? How does one industry know that they're being treated the same way when it comes to system expansion to provide them with their utilities? I don't hear you saying that that's something that y'all get down into the weeds as far as that, or it's not prescribed a methodology inside the wholesale power contract.
Well, the local power companies are required to apply their cost recovery methods through the rate schedules consistently and fairly across all ratepayers.
And how would someone, is there a methodology within this wholesale power contract? And by the way, let me ask you this. We heard yesterday that the terms and conditions on all these wholesale power contracts are equivalent across the system, that even if you're a great negotiator, you don't get to negotiate any better than the next person. Are these wholesale power contracts public record and anybody can see them with regards to the relationship between TVA and the LPC?
So we certainly would defer to local power companies on the sharing of those wholesale power contracts with their members or other interested parties. We have a process for which we work with them to disclose those contracts. So we do encourage and support the release of those, but we have a process for which folks go through to obtain them.
All right, and then my last question, and we're going to go around the horn then. With regards to pole attachments, seems like y'all got into that business, and it seems like the TVA, the member utilities and co-ops, have a higher pole attachment rate than, say, other utilities, investor-owned or others around the country. Do you find that to be a little bit self-serving whenever those utilities are now getting into the broadband expansion area, to where the lack of competitiveness between their ability to get on their own pole versus somebody else attached to it?
Thank you for the question. So our model is a full cost recovery methodology. It is intended to ensure that electric system ratepayers are not otherwise financing or funding or paying for, I should say, attachments on their poles that are not electric in nature. So our methodology is different from others, but we stand behind it. It is a very solid methodology in terms of ensuring that the ratepayers are not disadvantaged and otherwise subsidizing these costs of these non-electric attaching parties. Our methodology is designed to, it's designed to, depending on where the attaching party is on the pole and how much space they occupy, but it is intended to ensure that ratepayers are not subsidizing those other non-electric attaching parties. So it helps keep rates low, electric rates low.
No, I understand, but, and then my last question on that is does the broadband entity owned by munis and co-ops have to pay that? Does TVA, during y'all's exhaustive review of their finances, make sure that they pay those, or are those perceived complimentary?
Right, so we do require the local power companies, subsidiaries, or other divisions of the city to pay a pole attachment fee.
Outstanding. Thank you for that information. And we're going to go. Vice Chairman Brickens, you got a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do. And I'm going to shift a little bit away from the regulatory side to the kind of operational policy, if I could. Could y'all give me a thumbnail of the power generation sources of TVA right now as far as percentage today and maybe how it was 5 or 10 years ago?
I can start, but I'm going to refrain from trying to quote percentages because I will probably get them wrong. I don't have them in front of me. But as I mentioned in my opening remarks, our portfolio is comprised of hydro, nuclear, gas, coal, renewable energy. We have the recognition as TVA is bringing the newest nuclear unit online several years ago at Watts Bar. So we have a large nuclear fleet that is very reliable, that really is kind of a foundational to our system. Our hydro system that was established in the beginning of TVA, that is on the Tennessee River system. We utilize as much fuel as we can get from that. Now, I will say the changes in the last several years, we have begun retirement of our coal assets that are older, end of life. We have brought on some new gas assets and recently have set forth as the business drivers. Those businesses come into the valley, have a higher demand, and are asking for renewable energy. We have set forth on really increasing our portfolio as it relates to the amount of solar that we have in our system. I'd be happy to follow up specifically with a breakdown of percentages.
Maybe the specific question, the coal reduction, does TVA have a set policy when coal is going to be totally retired as an energy source or not?
We have a goal to have our coal units retired by 2035.
Okay.
But that's our long-term goal. Specific plant dates are still to be determined as we're working through the review process, the environmental review process of those closures and potential additions to replace it.
My next kind of question on power generation deals with solar energy. And there's a number of private sector solar energy companies coming into Tennessee and into the Valley area, large, extremely large solar farms. I'd like to know how their solar energy production works into TVA's revenue generation. And then the question is, why is not TVA doing this, going into the solar energy business as large as these private sector firms? So I'll stop there, see if you can.
That's a great question, and this is getting a bit outside my purview, so I'm going to be limited in my remarks. But we have we have an aspiration to add quite a bit of solar, thousands of megawatts of solar onto the system in the coming years, whether it is through purchase power agreements with the third-party provider or potentially in the future state, something that we might consider constructing ourselves. From a cost basis, as I mentioned, many industries coming into the valley with all of our economic development efforts are asking for renewable energy. It is not always the cheapest. If that is the case, then that incremental or that delta of the cost would not be socialized across the whole rate base. It would be borne to that entity, that business coming into the valley. So that's maybe answers a bit of your question. Would be happy to bring our experts in solar. We have a commercial organization solely focused on this and where we're going, working with the third-party providers. Happy to bring more information back.
Over the long term, I mean, the renewable, whether it's solar energy or something else, seems to be the growing trend. And does it, not that it will eventually put TVA out of the generation business if it's all done by the private sector, but it just seems like it's a significant growing area, and somehow from revenue generations, and how does this affect, you know, the local municipal power companies' access to that renewable source when it's coming from a private sector company? So I know that's...
Vice Chairman Brickens, I think you bring up a point that that is one of the things that is becoming apparently readily available and readily obvious to me through these hearings is in this dynamic field of utilities and power generation and the changing landscape of our state and the changing potential changes within the customer base of TVA, that it looks like that we may need to consider what it's going to look like without TVA, of us just defaulting that TVA runs everything in the state. Because that may or may not be with their mission as perhaps other wholesale power providers, whether they be solar, whether they be other entities brought in through, I guess it's called MISO or whatever, that the LPC in my area is considering. I think that it looks like we need to be prepared as a state for what happens when TVA does not regulate all of the power within the state. But we'll move on from there. Representative Representative Calfee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You referenced a few things that were contract violations, and just pick one. If you find one of your retailers are violating some part of the contract, how do y'all handle that? I'm assuming, and I'm going to use my granny's terms, you don't just cut the juice off, but do you ask them for a corrective action plan, or how do you do that?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. And we work very closely with the local power companies to remedy and come up with a corrective action plan, as you mentioned, to resolve any power contract issues that we find. We develop a plan with timelines and milestones and work with them carefully and closely to make sure that they adhere to that. So there's a lot of engagement, a lot of discussion, and our team works directly with the local power companies to make sure they are making progress on those corrective action plans.
That's what I hope to hear. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, you asked the question I was going to ask about who would regulate MLG&W if we left TVA. So I really would assume that would be something we'd ask the Public Utilities Commission. So anyway, that's all I had right now.
Thank you, sir. But given the mission of that would take a restructuring of TPUC as well, and which is my point, is that this body needs to be, we're going to have to be reactive to what the marketplace serves us up in the coming years. Representative Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to move us in a completely different direction that we could probably discuss this topic for an entire hearing unto itself, but based on the meetings we've had over the last couple of weeks regarding power and water and the distribution of those services, I have had more conversations about the security of our power grid and the security of the state's power grid and how the functionality of the two work. And it specifically, and this is not Congress, obviously based on the fact we balance our budget and have no debt and run things really well. This is obviously not Congress. But based on the fact that the tension that we have with China, Russia's possible invasion of Ukraine, North Korea beginning to relaunch missiles, it has brought back up the conversation of what an EMP attack would do to our power grid, what a solar flare event like in the 1800s would do to our power grid, how that would impact the power grid as a whole, but also specifically what individual states can do to protect the power grid. I read a report my congressman gave me a couple of years ago talking about, and I'll totally butcher this, but the core, the box, the central units that are used for the distribution of the power grid are made by one or two particular countries. They can only make a few of those a year. So in the event there was a large-scale EMP attack over North America or a solar flare event, it would be impossible to bring power back up because we simply could not bring these boxes back online. And you're talking about a nation without power, and that's the end of the nation. Now, obviously, that is way beyond a conversation anybody has been willing to have because of unwillingness of Congress to do the things that probably matter most to people. But so my question with setting that up is, what is TVA's responsibility, or what actions have TVA taken to protect the power grid, and specifically in the event of an EMP attack or a solar flare event? And then is it accurate that each individual state can take certain steps for protection of their own power grid, so in the event there was something, that certain protections for our infrastructure can be taken? Can you talk about that a little bit? And I know, Mr. Chairman, we could spend a whole hour on this, but I think it's an important conversation to have, important enough that there were 7 or 8 legislators at dinner last night, and it was the topic of our conversation. That's how exciting legislators are when we leave here, and these are the conversations we have. But it came up, and Chairman Boyd was a part of those conversations. Can you speak to that a little bit, please?
So it's an excellent question, and it's really outside of my, or Cameron, I think's ability to speak to it. What I can share is that our information, our IT organization, our CIO, and our Vice President of Cybersecurity, they spend a lot of time and focus and attention on working as a federal agency with the federal government to understand those risks, to ensure that TVA is safe and prepared for those risks. It is a conversation often with our board in terms of just risks that we may face. Cybersecurity threats is amongst the top concern, but we have plans. We have strength in our process and our systems. We feel that we are well positioned, but the risk is always there. We know that. So what I would offer, certainly for this committee, is TVA would be happy to bring my colleagues from our cybersecurity organization, IT organization, to this committee if so desired, to spend more time. They could provide much more color or detail than I could.
I think you might just want to find those 8 guys at dinner and fill them in.
We can do that.
We can do that,
Mr.
too.
Chairman.
I'm just glad you didn't give away any security secrets
Okay,
here today.
one more question.
Representative Zachary.
So just then bringing it down to the state level, I mean, I would, and I understand it's outside of beyond your expertise, and even moving beyond cybersecurity, because again, this would be basically an attack on our nation, EMP, via some sort of device launched in space that would then cover our country, cover North America, creating just a complete outage. So I would like to know what steps can TVA or has TVA taken? Congress doesn't act. Congress does nothing. What steps has TVA taken? But I would like some sort of plan presented to us about what an individual state can do to take the steps to protect the infrastructure of the state. If there is an unwillingness for Congress or TVA's not, what steps can we take to protect our individual power grids? So if we can, Cameron, if we could
Understood.
follow up on that, I would like to explore those conversations further.
Happy to do
Thank
that.
you.
Absolutely.
All righty, thank you all. Representative Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. First of all, thank you for being here. Appreciate your testimony. Also, for you efforts to continue to down the path to clean energy and renewable energy and resources, very important. I have a question that wasn't touched on, but it's along the same vein, I guess. Originally going back to the functions of TVA, I believe there's 11 communities in the state of Tennessee, very significant communities. You're talking about Knoxville, Chattanooga, others. where flood mitigation is a major thing. I mean, obviously, one of the key things the TVA did was to reduce flooding in the Tennessee Valley. Can you talk about, as we continue to see issues with floods, I represent Nashville, we continue to see flood areas, and it seems like the floodplain continues to grow. Are there improvements being made to the infrastructure to protect our communities from flooding?
Yes, so again, bit outside of my scope, but I'll give you a bit of an answer, and if follow-up's needed, happy to do that. So we manage the Tennessee River system, which really, like you said, kind of runs from East Tennessee, Knoxville, Chattanooga, down into North Alabama. So for the dams that we have on that system, we do continually monitor and maintain, ensure the strength and integrity of those dams. In terms of Nashville, some of that falls, I believe, to the Corps of Engineers, right, versus Tennessee, or TVA, excuse me. So I can't speak as well to that, but we do work closely with all state and federal agencies as it relates to our experience and depth of experience in management of a river system with as many dams as we do have under our purview. And as I noted up front, it was part of our core of our mission and an initial focus, and it still is today as well.
And I guess just as those dams, begin to age and we start to see some of the different stresses from increased water flows, are there any plans for improvements to that infrastructure that's really critical to protecting those communities?
Safety of our communities is, as always, at the forefront. So if anything were to be, we have plans, we are constantly monitoring our dams, and if anything were to be identified that needed to be addressed, we would be doing so absolutely to ensure the integrity of those dams.
Thank you. We've, personally, I'm aware of a lot of the investments you have made at Pickwick lately, shoring up that dam and renovating those locks. And so it's, y'all are always working, that's for sure. Leader Camper, you have a question for us?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, man, I'm sitting here and I'm listening to all of this, and I tell you, for a person who have served 21 years in military intelligence for this country, who on a regular basis has had to brief Congress, Select Committee on Intelligence, Armed Services Committee, the White House, and who have also war-gamed cyber attacks on this country, who have been entrusted with the highest level of clearances possible, that we're sitting here now possibly leaking intelligence based on some, thank you for your response, on what could possibly happen in some of these scenarios. Trust me that there are plans. There are courses of actions that have been developed, that are updated on a continuous basis to protect the U.S. in any of these scenarios. So let's not put us in a compromising position and asking about what some of these plans might be, not in this very public hearing. Now, I had a question around the pole attachments, which on your slide you talked about some recent clarifications of policies around that. So I would be interested to know what, what the clarification was about. It's been a lot of just conversation over the years about pole attachments, but I noticed in your slide you did say there was some recent policy clarifications. Can you talk to what that was or what that is?
Sure, yes, ma'am. So back in 2016, the TVA board opted to clarify its position on pole attachments and develop a methodology for which the local power companies would apply in charging those parties who attach to their poles. So it was we were being very clear about what our role is as it relates to the rates in pole attachments.
And the thought was, I presume, around your objectives to keep it low and non-discriminatory.
That's correct. So we wanted to make sure that, as I mentioned earlier, that electric system ratepayers were not subsidizing non-electric attaching parties to electric system poles. So that was the drive for that. The objective was to achieve low rates, and then for those rates to be applied fairly and consistently, to your point on non-discrimination.
Thank you. Also, let me take this moment really to actually thank TVA for that very mission, particularly around keeping the rates low. Because in doing so, it has allowed, in my area, MLGW to keep the rates low and be recognized nationally for it. MLGW have been recognized nationally on a consistent basis for the work that they're doing. So I think a lot of that is due to the relationship with TVA and your objectives of low rates and non-discriminatory practices. So I want to thank you for that and thank our public utility for the same. This weekend, we had an ice storm, and it was terrible. You know, I mean, power lines was down just due to the weight of the ice. Trees, the area I live in, beautiful area, tall trees, the weight of the ice. We couldn't control it. It is what it is. But the people there worked very hard to get it back up. So I want to appreciate the linemen and all the people who, for 16 hours a day, every day, was working to restore power to the citizens. I didn't have power in my house. I understood that they were working hard, and understood, you know, and let me thank them too for daily, and sometimes 2-3 times a day, of having press conferences, interaction with the public on Facebook, letting people know live what was going on, check the map and all of that, so people can be in tune to what was going on. So I'm appreciative of what happened this weekend. It was beyond our control. I mean, they would fix one junction box and a tree will fall over here and hit another one. But they never stopped working. And I know there's some talk out there about maybe they need to sell it to somebody and they'll do better. Well, I don't know if they'll do better. I don't know if their objective is going to be keep the rates low, non-discriminatory. I don't know that. But I have a history of knowing what has been going on with MLGW and their relationship with TVA. So I appreciate that. And work through whatever y'all got to work through. I'm not in that. Lastly, you had a question. One more question, Mr. Chairman.
All righty, we're the hour's getting
Oh,
late.
the hours is getting long. I understand. I'll leave it at that. Again, look, I want to thank the people in Memphis for all the great work they did this weekend, all the linesmen, all of them. I mean, you know, their families who sacrificed too. Their power was out too, but they were still working. So I want to thank them for that. Thank you, TVA. Whatever other question I'll have, I'll ask it later offline, Mr. Chairman.
All righty, thank you, Leader. And I will say this to TVA, that we're appreciative of the fact that the wholesale distribution of power has not been a problem for us in this state for quite some time. It's we, from an LPC and from a distribution standpoint, weather and inclement events and tornadoes and things like that typically create our biggest outage issues. It's not from a failure of the system or a lack of generation capacity. And for that, and I'll say something else too, is for those of us as we've gotten into a lot more dependent upon electronics, the clean power that is issued to us and the consistency of it is something that we sometimes take for granted. Lastly, going to carry us home is our Deputy Speaker, Speaker Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I ask a question, I would like to personally thank you for the meetings that we've had dealing with the manufacturer all the way down to the ratepayers. So thank you so much. It's been very informative. You had mentioned regulating waterways and recreation, and I think you mentioned you regulate 7,000 square miles. Is that right?
The shoreline, in terms of our responsibilities that we have oversight of, yes.
Right. So you regulate, private marinas. Is that correct?
It is a separate functionality within TVA, not within Cameron and I's direct purview in terms of dock permits and that type of regulation that we do,
Right.
but it is a function TVA provides, yes, sir.
And I think on the average, you charge marinas like 4% of their gross income. Is that out of your purview?
It is, I'm sorry, certainly could follow up, I'm not sure.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, you had mentioned that TVA is regulated by the board?
That's correct. Yes, sir. The TVA board is the regulatory body for which the TVA Act is very clear on being delegated the authority by Congress to regulate.
And so the TVA board is regulated by Congress.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
That's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Representative Alexander.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thanks to TVA for restoring our dam on Boone Lake up in Washington County. We were without that lake for several years because of a bad problem there. And so thank you all for doing what you did, for cleaning our lake up. You all worked out tirelessly, and we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty. And with that, to our friends from TVA, thank you for your time today. I think you will find that we're appreciative that you were here, but frankly, you've generated almost as many questions as we had before you got here with regards to this, especially as we see things happen within our state. And I know that you being a federal agency, sometimes having state legislators asking you questions is not probably exactly the way you want to spend your day. But we see a void coming with regards to the regulatory structure within our state. I also see circumstances that are arising that is going to impact our citizens and our constituents with regards to how they are supposed to be treated by their energy provider. I also see energy providers having the potential to become managers of growth patterns within geographic areas due to their ability to restrict services or provide services, sometimes to constituents who have no redress because they're municipally owned but not by the municipality that people live in. So I see there being a lot of issues and situations that are coming in front of this body in the coming years that we're going to take our responsibilities very seriously. And we look forward to working with you and trying to figure out the impacts to our citizens from some of these decisions that these different bodies make. But I want to thank you for being here. It was very informative. And if you have any wrap-ups, and then we'll go back in session and tend to the rest of our business.
Thank you very much. And if I may just offer to the last point you made, a few additional comments that were not highlighted. First, we have been working closely with MLGW, respectful of the process that they've been going through, and to evaluate the potential for other power supply providers. But we believe at the end of the day, we do provide the greatest value, and we certainly hope that's resolved in that manner. MLGW represents roughly 10% of TVA's as power. the largest customers that we have. But of the other, we mentioned 153 local power companies. Over the last 2 years, 146 of those 153 have found benefit in signing a long-term power contract that TVA offered, which is an evergreen 20-year contract. With that is a rate credit to those LPCs of 3.1%, which many are choosing to reinvest in their systems. There's also the ability for those to have a bit of flexibility, generation flexibility, such as putting solar on their systems. For us, this was a demonstration of increasing our partnership, the long partnership that we've had with our local power companies, and with that are working now, and always have been, but with those to really think about what does that future hold. So just as you have mentioned, I don't want to leave you without saying that TVA with our LPCs is working very closely and giving a lot of thought to what is the future of our industry? How do we need to evolve our asset plans, our regulatory strategy, our financial plans, given what we know is true, which is the landscape is changing. But we feel well positioned and are excited about the partnerships that we have. And again, being respectful of MLGW and the process they're working through to determine what their best course is, certainly hopeful and believing that we provide the greatest value, and looking forward to seeing how that is ultimately resolved. So thank you, Mr. Chairman and the committee, for this opportunity and for the questions that we've generated. Look forward to the opportunity to follow up.
Well, as being a ratepayer of MLG&W who has no redress against them with regards to their decision-making, we are, those of us who live outside who don't get to vote for the Memphis City Council or the decision-makers in that process, one of the things that I can see a question can arise in my mind is are we comfortable in one political subdivision maintaining that type of power and control over other political subdivisions? I can tell you I'm not very comfortable with it, but we will see how that discussion finds its way through our halls in the coming months and years. But with that, we're going to go back into session.
Thank you.
And our next presenter was the Tennessee Public Utilities Commission, but I think Tim probably has more to say than 5 minutes. And so without us having adequate time, we're going to roll that and item number 4? Item number 4, we're going to roll those to next week calendars if TPUC will indulge us in perhaps coming back. Maybe we can get the executive director here. We don't know. We'll see, do our best. But thank you. We are going with, do I hear a motion to adjourn? I just heard one. We're through.